Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll get started shortly here. As a reminder, you do have a Q&A function on the left side of your screen. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, you can use that chat function to type in your questions. Our speakers might answer them throughout the webinar or might save them for the end. So feel free to type in any questions as we go through, and we'll be sure to answer them. This webinar is also being recorded. And there should be a live transcript set up, but if for some reason it's not working or not showing up, go ahead and put that in the chat and I'll see if we can troubleshoot, but hopefully we'll get that live transcript going throughout. Okay, I'll pass it over to Mike now.
All right, thank you, Kate. Hey everybody, my name is Mike Kajeski. I'm the CEO and co-founder of MedCrypt. I see lots of familiar names in the attendee list. Good to see all of you, thanks for joining. So today we wanted to take some time to talk about the final version of the FDA's pre-market guidance, talk about some of the things that surprised us, didn't surprise us. I mentioned that I've seen lots of familiar names in the list, so I don't think we're going to do sort of FDA pre-market guidance 101 here. I think most of you are familiar with the FDA's efforts around cybersecurity. We're going to assume some base knowledge of what the FDA has been working on here and talk a little bit more about how the final guidance deviates from final drafts and what we can do as device manufacturers and other stakeholders in the industry to comply with it, to move forward. And I'm joined today by two esteemed colleagues, Seth Carmody and Naomi Schwartz. Seth, I'll start with you. I think before joining MedCrypt, you had some experience at the FDA, is that right?
Slightly, Mike. Yeah, I spent 8 years at the FDA. First 4 years were basically spent being a medical device reviewer, working principally in diabetes, where I met Naomi. And then the last 4 years of my FDA career were spent building tech policy, of which we are in part discussing today.
Awesome. Yeah, it's got to be really exciting for you to see this draft of the guidance come to finalization after so many years and so much effort on the part of you and many others at the FDA.
Like getting a walk back down the history that I lived when we were there. It really exemplifies the commitment that FDA and our public health servants have to getting things over the finish line. This was not easy, especially dealing with a global pandemic in the middle of it. So just feels good, looks good, and just happy that it's out and in final. Since it's one of only three guidances that ever went out in two drafts. So good to see that it got over the finish line.
Absolutely. And Naomi, I believe you have some lived experience with this topic as well, right? Do you want to talk a bit about your background?
That's right. So as Seth mentioned, the two of us were in the same review division for a brief period of time before he jumped to policy. And the diabetes device space that I regulated and that he did some review in as well is one of the ones that has really driven a lot of the changes in the pre-market guidance, because we saw a lot of really interesting and sometimes dangerous things happening with diabetes devices related to cybersecurity. So as we look at the changes in the guidance from 2018 to 2022 to today, we're really seeing lessons learned from the experiences with diabetes devices, cardiac pacemakers, and neurostimulators primarily, but a lot of other devices as well.
Yeah. So I think that's actually an excellent way for us to start the conversation. And by the way, I'm hoping that today's webinar is much more of a conversation than it is a didactic presentation like a college course. So for those of you who are attendees, really encourage you to add some questions in the Q&A and let us know if you have questions or things that we should talk about. But I'd love to maybe start with you, Naomi, just asking about the changes between the last version of the document and the version that came out. I know I had many device manufacturers and people who are involved in MedCrypt say they were either afraid that or they were hoping that the final version of the guidance would have a lot less teeth, let's say, and that some of the more ambitious cybersecurity requests that the FDA made in the past might be pulled out. Is that something that you see, or what are some of the changes that were most surprising to you?
FDA has not lost any teeth. In fact, if anything, they've gotten sharper. So picture your, Halloween vampire teeth that you can pop into your mouth. Those are now permanent for FDA because of statutory authority. So the guidance itself is reflecting the statutory authority in some ways by clarifying and adding additional emphasis on things like secure product development framework. But it is not losing anything major. We are just getting a little bit of clarity on what FDA means by certain different things, like changing vulnerability management to cybersecurity management. They're telling you it's not just about the vulns, and that's really important.
Yeah, actually, maybe, so I have a couple slides here, and again, we're trying to make this more of a conversation. Maybe I'll skip to the slide here that we have on that cybersecurity management plan. What's the difference between cybersecurity management versus vulnerability management? Seth, I know this is an area you've spent a lot of time looking at. What's the difference here?
I mean, certainly, as I've said in other talks, that the whole concept of, FDA being a risk management agency, right? They're a risk-based agency. The idea of, setting into motion a set of processes, which, roughly can be called secure lifecycle management in some way, describes the vulnerabilities that exist in your system, establishing process to elucidate them, to discover them, having ways to assess whether they're, how bad they are for you, for your patients. Certainly that is inclusive, but there's so much more around that, right? That if you just focus on vulnerability itself, that you kind of lose the forest for the trees, right? And that you really need to back way up, like, what am I going to do when I find vulnerabilities, right? So the FDA is keen on updates and patches. If we look at the 524B and see emphasis on updatability and patching, you see it as sort of properties or security objectives to achieve. Like, that's what they're talking about, right? Yeah, finding vulnerabilities is a critical part that presents those risks. But how are you going to support everything that comes along with fixing those vulnerabilities, right? And that's really sort of the gist and spirit of a overall management plan.
I remember in discussions around earlier versions of this pre-market guidance, there was discussion about an SBOM, a software bill of materials, which at the time was called a cybersecurity bill of materials. And the discussion, or the interpretation that I heard many medical device manufacturers have is, oh, the FDA wants us to create a list of all the software in our devices so we can give it to hospitals. And there was a question of, well, what are the hospitals going to do with this? How deep do we need to go? Is this dependencies to dependencies? And the next version of the guidance came out and said, well, no, you need to have this list of software, but you also need to, as a device manufacturer, cross-reference it against some list of known vulnerabilities to know when there is a vulnerability. And then I heard a lot of discussion about how complex that process actually is. And is that something that the device manufacturer needs to do? Is this optional? So I was really curious to see what would come out in the final draft of the guidance. And the final draft of the guidance had, not only do you need to have a software bill of materials, not only do you need to cross-reference it against a list of vulnerabilities, I believe they added the known exploit vulnerability catalog part, right? Not only do you need to know what vulnerabilities they are, you need to be prioritizing them for remediation. And one way to do that is to know what vulnerabilities have been exploited. So really, I see the final language around vulnerability management, cybersecurity management as being an order of magnitude more detailed and complex than in the initial draft. Does that sound right, Naomi?
That's absolutely right. And in terms of being more complex, it is a lot harder to achieve. So what we're really going to be seeing is people discovering not only how hard is vulnerability management, but how hard is it to prioritize, how hard is it to triage all those things, especially if you're looking backwards at a device that's already on market. And it's really going to come down to, how do you figure out how to scale? Because you don't want to try and use the MITRE MDDT tool in a retrospective way. You might use that in an emergency if there's a new Urgent 11 or a new Swain tooth or a new WannaCry, but you don't want to apply that to an SBOM where you have 180 software components and 207 vulnerabilities. That will be a nightmare, and it's too manpower intensive, and it's going to take too much time, and it's probably not rewarding. So you have to figure out a way to scale these things, and you need to have a way to keep your finger on the pulse of your SBOM and vulnerabilities and exploits that doesn't kill your team.
If you're a device manufacturer and you have an SBOM and you've analyzed the vulnerabilities and you only have 207, you're absolutely in the top decile of device manufacturers that we talk to, right? Once you dig in and really take a look at all the software that's in there, there's just a huge number of vulnerabilities, and it's really difficult to understand, if you have 207 or 2000, which of those 2000 should we really be focused on today? One other thing that I always hear discussed. So we're a medical device cybersecurity company. We're backed by investors. I've been raising money for our company from investors since 2016, and I remember early investors saying, a medical device cybersecurity company will only be successful if the FDA really makes cybersecurity mandatory, whatever that means. So I'm looking at the final version of the pre-market guidance, and the second page, the top of it says contains non-binding recommendations. So I've heard not only investors, but maybe less security savvy executives at device manufacturers say, this is optional. These are recommendations from the FDA. Yet there's something called eStar, and eStar's got something about cybersecurity. I don't know anything about eStar. Seth, what's eStar?
Well, backing up to your previous point, Mike, that the policy, the guidance is sort of optional, meaning that it's a way, it's a how, and there can be many hows to achieve objectives, right? So that's what makes, and we haven't gone into it, I'm sure we'll dip into it, is the Consolidated Appropriations Act in Section 3305 and the resulting amendments to 524B of the FD&C Act. But the idea here is you've made it illegal not to do certain things when you're trying to submit pre-market submissions or submissions to the secretary. But how do you achieve the things that are in that law, right? And that's really where the strength of the policy comes, right? That it's a way to achieve the law. Before that law was passed, that you're hanging on an interpretation of the law. So certainly it's a how, but certainly, and Amy, you can attest to this for sure, is if you have a different methodology, you're going to have to go through, you're going to have to 10x the effort to try to prove that methodology to the FDA over their current understanding of how things work. So generally people think, okay, I'm just going to follow what the FDA says in terms of the how. That's not to be said that there aren't mistakes or there aren't ways to improve. And I think the FDA has demonstrated nothing if not to be evolving at all times with their policy. So part of that is part of that policy and operationalization of the law is through eStar and RTA, a way to meet sort of regulatory mandates or congressional mandates on timelines to get through the FDA. I don't know if folks know this, but there was a time not too long ago where you would submit submissions to the FDA and basically you wouldn't hear anything, and then in 2 years you might get an approval or clearance. And along came a DUFOR, the Medical Device User Fee Authorization Act, and basically said, hey, we need to get some certainty around these timelines. We'll pay you user fees, and then in exchange for meeting certain time guaranteed timelines. RTA is a way to make sure that holding manufacturers accountable to make sure all parts of the submission are submitted before starting that review clock. So that's basically the way that RTA is thought about. eStar is a permutation of that. They are being retrofitted for cybersecurity as we speak. I just took a look today to see what those two items are saying with respect to cybersecurity. RTA right now points to the new guidance. eStar still has a limited set of requirements related to post-market management plan and then risk assessment. So those are still being tooled up to fully embrace the new policy.
So I'm a device manufacturer. We're submitting a 510K submission. We're using the eStar tool. There's going to be questions around cybersecurity. Is it the sort of thing where it's like a required field on a form on the internet, and as long as I put something in the box, then I'm good? So there's a question that says, do you have any vulnerabilities? And I write, no, of course I don't have any vulnerabilities. Naomi, what happens if I use eStar and I say, yeah, I don't have any vulnerabilities?
So again, haven't looked at the most recent version of eStar, and I'm not sure it's fully tooled up to fit against the final guidance. But the way that eStar is working before that final guidance came out, you're asked questions like, do you have software? Do you have any interoperability? By interoperability, they mean electronic interfaces of any type, USB, Wi-Fi, BLE, you name it. If you have some means of connecting to the thing, whether it's intended to be connected or not, if I can find that plug, I'm going to plug something into it. You have to provide cybersecurity. So if you answer yes there, cybersecurity fields pop open and you have to fill in all the things. All of those reflect what's in the guidance, the previous final guidance. They're being updated to match the now final guidance. But if you say no to any of them, you're going to have a rationale, and you'll have to fill it in right there. If you say not applicable, you'll need a rationale. If you say yes, you're going to need to point to a bunch of evidentiary documents that you attach to it. If you leave a single box blank and don't answer yes, no, or NA, you can't submit it. So that's a precursor to FDA saying, hey, we're going to refuse to accept. You can't submit. That's equivalent, sort of. But if you submit something and you're like, yeah, I don't have any interfaces, and you actually have USB sprinkled throughout your documentation, a reviewer will receive this file. They'll do a quick search on keywords like, hey, electronic interfaces. And they'll go, you know, guys, you have a USB and you said no electronic interfaces. They will put you on an automatic hold. And you will have to go back and refill out all the documentation until you get it right. So they still have a mechanism to refuse to accept, but it is intended for the eStar form itself to catch you and tell you the things you need to include. If you are missing that accidentally, or if you miss it in a I'm trying to be smart and clever way, and you fail to include something like, yeah, a USB is in fact an electronic interface, they tell you that. If you fail to include it, you will go on hold. Obviously, FDA is not going to run around and penalize you for it, but I would point out that the final guidance references Section 301Q, prohibited acts under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. FDA has a mechanism to tell you you did not include something mandated under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in Section 524B, and that's actually violative. So not saying FDA is going to be running around doing that. They don't have a lot of, you know, person power to track people down and beat them up for things like this, but they're telling you in those sections of the guidance that cite the act that they can do it. So you should be aware that if they see something really egregious, they will do it.
Yeah. So maybe let's try to make this actionable for some of the people on the webinar today who I know are product security leaders inside their device manufacturers. Let's say hypothetically, I'm a product security person inside a medium to large device manufacturer, and my leadership, whether it's VP level R&D people or regulatory assurance people, say there's this FDA cybersecurity guidance, but it's guidance, it's sort of optional, and we had somebody do a penetration test on our device 18 months ago, they didn't find anything, so we're good. What is a really concise way to explain to my leadership what the law is and how the guidance relates to what it is that we need to do? I don't know, Seth, if that's a good question for you. I think maybe that's
Yeah, sure. The law really is interesting. So if you I don't know if this is the concise answer, Mike. So what we'll do is we'll take some notes and then we'll distill out what we want from here. But the law covers basically 4 general areas, right? It's very concerned about vulnerability monitoring and management, right? Which makes sense. They're saying, hey, have a set of processes that elucidate vulnerabilities, have a way to fix them, minimize them pre-market, monitor post-market, and have a way to respond that's commensurate with risk once they're on the market. For better or for worse, updates is sort of the way that they're looking to control that risk post-market, and it makes sense. I know there are struggles, there's additional sort of a debt and burden when we say, oh, start doing updates, like having a secure update mechanism, right? This is just more engineering work that we need to do. But I've personally been a part of post-market responses where we didn't have the opportunity to update, and it was super painful for FDA, super painful for patients, super painful for manufacturers. So it seems like the best way to do it. I'm not sure if updates are going the way of passwords or whatever, but I know there's some flack there. But 2 other things I want to say before I come back to your original question, and that is, the FDA has a line in there that basically says, hey, we can add requirements in the future, which is really important, right? And it says, hey, we have the foresight to know that we're not going to get everything right, and we don't know everything right now, but we need a way to make this law flexible, future flexible, which is fantastic. And then interestingly enough, and this makes sense, that they say, hey, look, just because this is dealing with new devices doesn't mean that we can't apply it to old devices. And if you think about really how these devices are developed. Right? A lot of the times, the code base, for lack of a better phrase, is just sort of revved for the next set of features, but may inherit a lot of the security debt that was previously put out there. So, and I've personally been involved in post-market issues where we look at, here's your new device, here are the things that are wrong with it from a security perspective. Oh, do those things exist in the previous device? Is that, how big of a problem is that? So roughly speaking, that's kind of what the law says. Obviously, you can go and look and dive into it specifically, but bottom line is, if I were speaking with executive leadership and other strategizing of like, what does this all mean? It's illegal to go through the FDA without these things. That you won't, even if you got through, the FDA didn't notice it, it's still illegal, right? Like, you're on the market and you're in violation of the law. So I think that is what I would take to them. And we didn't have that before, and now we do. So I don't know if that's an effective messaging. Maybe our audience can weigh in and it's illegal. I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Seth, what you're saying is, so Congress modified the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, Section 524B, to say that the FDA has the authority to regulate cybersecurity, and that the FDA's guidance document is their recommendation of how to best comply with Section 524B of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. And during review, you're going to get lots of questions about what you've done around cybersecurity. And even if for some reason your submission slips through a crack and you don't get really great detailed questions around cybersecurity, failing to satisfy Section 524B is illegal. Is that about right, Naomi?
That's it in a nutshell.
Cool. Yeah, we regularly, no, maybe not regularly. I will sometimes hear from device manufacturers who will say, we think this is an issue, maybe, but in prior submissions to the FDA, nobody ever said anything. So we're just going to go with it until someone says anything. And it takes all of the restraint in my body to not say, okay, so your strategy is to evade the law and just hope that you don't get caught. It doesn't seem like a great long-term strategy. One of the things that we regularly hear device manufacturers ask about or use as a reason for why this does not apply to them is, and so we're using the slides here as sort of reference materials, not in order. My device isn't connected to the internet, therefore these security rules don't apply, right? Or my device isn't connected to the internet, therefore the only rule that applies is blank. I know we've talked about this on prior webinars, and this topic of cyber devices has been discussed a whole lot. I would be surprised if anybody who is in the audience for today's webinar, hasn't at least read a little bit about what a cyber device is. But I think it's maybe really useful for us to discuss how product security leaders inside device manufacturers can message to their teams, hey, we are a cyber device. I remember at last spring's HISAC meeting, Dr. Suzanne Schwartz was doing an FDA town hall, and somebody stood up and asked a question and said, hey, my device, it's one endpoint, it runs Windows, it's not connected to anything, but it has a USB port. Is it a cyber device? Seth, do you remember Suzanne's answer?
Yeah, USB port is a cyber device. So I think it's something that's it's not only been emphasized here in the definition of cyber device, but this whole idea of connectedness has been with us since the beginning of looking into policy. And having been on the front lines of the 2018 original draft of this document, there was actually part of the policy was determining whether you were connected or not, and then how that dictated what activities you did, which was a great test, honestly, of where we were in our maturity scale here. And what ultimately was decided is, I'm going to echo the words of Professor Eugene Wasserman here. If you didn't design it not to be connected, then it can be connected. And that's sort of the gist of what Suzanne has mentioned at HISAC, was like the ability to connect, not whether you intend it to connect, right? These are the critical sort of delineation points in policy. So cyber devices is supposed to be inclusive. It's got two other parameters there to parse through, but in general, like if I were messaging to leadership or my development teams, I'd be like, you're connected until proven otherwise. right? And that would be a good assumption to make.
So how long until we see a surgical robot encased in a Faraday cage? This thing is designed to not be connected.
I don't know. Do we make Faraday surgical robot size Faraday cages? I'm assuming we do.
Oh,
Some
you can
can.
make an OR one. So yeah.
Yeah. Bob Silva asked a good question. Can you discuss, quote, rate at which update can be delivered to devices in more detail? So my personal, excuse me, my personal background's in radiation oncology. I worked with big heavy iron or whatever they call it, capital equipment devices that consisted of multiple endpoints deployed at a hospital, usually with a firewall around some subnet. And most radiation oncology customers had a service contract that allowed a representative from the device manufacturer to come out and apply software updates, but a sizable portion of customers did not have that service contract. And I know that software updates were adopted sparingly a lot of times by hospitals. On top of that, I know that our verification and validation V&V process took, I don't know, 3 months or something in order to go through. And I heard that it cost $1 million to go through V&V for a single release. So it's pretty common in my experience for capital equipment device manufacturers, at least, to have a software release cycle that is 6, 9, 12 months long. So, hey, if there's a vulnerability found, we're going to get it in the next release. We're going to patch it in the next release. The next release is 12 months away. So, Naomi, what do you think about the reference here on the screen about the rate at which update can be delivered to devices? What's the right software cadence? What number do I put in the eStar form field to get through FDA?
So there isn't a number that you would put in, and thankfully it's not a form field that you have to fill in with a discrete number. But the answer is, you're going to hear this from FDA a lot. You're going to hear it from me because I spent a lot of time there. It depends. What it depends on is what is your situation that you have to patch for. If you have an MDR that includes a death report and you're responding to that with a patch, you have a requirement under the quality system regulation to respond to it in a certain timeline. That means reporting it to FDA. That means doing your root cause analysis and your CAPA, and you got to do it fast. There's a 5-day timeline associated with a death report. That's a very different thing than if you have a cybersecurity issue that relates to patient frustration. I keep getting kicked out. By the time I go in and log into my system for the 5th time, I can get in and it's okay. Nobody's dying. That's not as problematic, but you have to balance the risks associated with the problem that you're evaluating with the benefits of the device. And you have to take a look at how fast you can actually update the thing and how quickly you can deliver them. So there's a reality that, I can make a patch, but it doesn't necessarily get propagated as rapidly. If your patching mechanism is over the air, you have a different perspective than if you're using SneakerNet. I think somebody mentioned that in the Q&A. You also have a problem where some of your customer base may choose not to update. Now, if you have a mechanism in your contract language and in the application that they have that they can't say no to an update, that's one thing. But if there's a mechanism by which they can refuse an update, that's a whole other problem. So what FDA is asking you to do is to explain to them, how do you evaluate what kind of patch timeline you need to have? How do you manage that patching? What are your compensating controls if you're in a situation where you have a death report and you can't instantaneously patch the things, which is usually the truth, right? We can't actually change software that fast, and we have to validate it, and that takes time. You have to put together a complete story that traces back to all the parts of 820 that are relevant, that explains how this activity fits into your quality system. So your answer may be, for certain types of things, we patch within 2 quarters, which is our regular patch cycle is quarterly. For other things, we may have to patch within 1 quarter. For other things, we're going to patch out of cycle, and we're going to patch as fast as quick, possible. And we're going to have compensating controls issued instantaneously, as soon as we can, like within 5 days, whatever that timeline is per 820.
Yep. And actually, that's, I think, a good segue to Bill Hansen's question. So he asks, regarding SBOM, what are the expectations and strategies for tracking devices on the market, especially when updates and patches are not made simultaneously? So if we think about patching frequency along with vulnerability monitoring in an SBOM, as I mentioned earlier, I think if you take an SBOM from any 1-year-old medical device, excuse me, and you cross-reference the software used in that SBOM with the NVD, you're going to get a number of vulnerabilities between 100 and a couple of thousand, right? It's a large number of vulnerabilities. Not every one of those vulnerabilities, excuse me, requires an urgent patch. Some of those vulnerabilities might not even require a patch at all. They might not be relevant. So I guess how does a device manufacturer think about triaging the hundreds or thousands of vulnerabilities that will come up for a device already in the field? And how does that fit into the patching strategy that Naomi described of, standard is 6 months. We can do it standard is 6 months. We can do it in 3 months if we need to. And if there's something really, really urgent, we can do it ASAP with compensating controls. Seth, how do you think about prioritizing the things coming out of an SBOM analysis?
Don't we have CVSS 4.0? I mean, that seems like that's the latest and greatest, right?
So if CVSS 4.0 is greater than Y, then patch, right?
That's where the industry currently is. So
that's a joke. Don't do that. That's not that. Don't. Yeah. Seth and I are joking. Sorry. Well, sarcasm is our love language inside MedCrypt.
Yeah. I mean, only half joking, Mike. I mean, the industry is still rallying around, risk assessment methodologies which are largely unproven, but feel good and I think some of the work that we have going on inside here is to try to change that, and working with manufacturers to do so. And then also, like, getting back to the scaling problem, if you've got, hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities, and for a large manufacturer, that's easily achievable. No pejoratives, intent necessary. It just, you have a large portfolio, you're using a lot of software. But by virtue of doing great things, you're going to incur some of that security debt. But how do you start to develop techniques that are around known risk assessment methodologies, but doing them faster really is sort of the next stage of development for these manufacturers. So I don't have a really great answer for you. I just know that what we're doing, single CVE disposition, leveraging CVSS 3.1 or 4.0, just not going to cut it.
In software development, there's this idea of unit testing, where before you write a feature, you say, okay, I'm going to run a test after the feature is done. And when I run this new function that I write, if I input X, then I'm going to expect Y as the output. I like to think of unit testing a vulnerability management strategy with a couple of cases where we maybe can all agree, what the conclusion should be. So for example, there was I'm doing this on the fly, so there might be some disagreement on my assessment here, but there are occasionally cybersecurity vulnerabilities that are discussed pretty broadly, like swing tooth was a pretty significant Bluetooth vulnerability. And I seem to remember most of the device manufacturers with whom we work saying, swing tooth, affects our device. There are some compensating controls in place. We're going to communicate those compensating controls to our users, and we're going to patch swing tooth, maybe in our next planned software update. I don't remember a whole lot of embedded device manufacturers shipping brand new devices with new Bluetooth system on chips out into the field. So the swing tooth, if you input swing tooth into your vulnerability management strategy, and the output is we're going to fix in the next release, that sounds about reasonable. Naomi, is that your experience with swing tooth?
Yeah, so I was still reviewing diabetes devices at FDA when swing tooth hit. And the very first thing we asked everybody, and this was in rapid return phone calls. So it was, I call you up, you call me back within 30 minutes, no kidding. And it happened. And everybody was really, really, really excellent about responding. Are you affected? What are the risks? How fast can you patch? And of course, the how fast can you patch depends on how fast Nordic or your vendor can patch. And it also depends on people going in and evaluating the chipsets that they're using that weren't listed by the original researcher, but that may also be vulnerable. So we had these great conversations with people. They rapidly figured out, yes, we're affected. Here's our list of risks. Here's compensating controls. And there was not a single case where there was a risk that was so high that we had to tell people, hey, stop using your automated insulin dosing system, where a wrong answer could lead to a potentially lethal injection of insulin which can also be life-saving, right? There was 0 situations where the risk was that high. So there wasn't a necessity for, immediate shutdown of use of the devices and immediate patching, but every single one of them identified that there was at least some risk. Most of it was going to be user inconveniences, denial of service type situations. And all of them agreed that for the situations they had, notification of their patient base was going to be important, and that they would be able to get patches out to those devices that had a lifespan greater than X number of days within a certain period of time.
Cool. So Bill Hansen and others, if you have a vulnerability management plan in place internally and you want to unit test it, if you use Bluetooth, maybe use SwingTooth as a test. And if the result is there are compensating controls in place, we'll let users know and we'll patch in the next cycle. It's probably about right. Another unit test, Seth, 2017 WannaCry ransomware attack, taking down hospitals in the UK throughout the NHS. If I remember correctly, there were a collection of Windows releases that had a vulnerability in a specific file transfer protocol that was allowing this active ransomware to propagate throughout hospital networks. And the FDA and others were asking device manufacturers, do any of your devices out in the field depend on this version of Windows? Do they have this SMB vulnerability? So Seth, if you were to input a WannaCry-like ransomware propagation event and that Windows SMB vulnerability into your vulnerability management plan, what should the likely conclusion be?
Yeah, so and Mike, just to clarify the conclusion that to patch or not patch or fast or not fast, is that?
Yeah. How frequently did you see device manufacturers conclude, hey, this is something we got to patch ASAP?
Yeah, I think when I think about WannaCry and sort of the roughly five vulnerabilities, CVEs that were associated with the Eternal Blue exploits, you're looking at what I call the NSA level pathogen, right? That people design exploits to be maximally effective, right? So when you're dealing with exploitability level of that, it's like 211, right? So the idea that you're somehow going to escape fixing it is kind of weird and requires great claims, require great evidence, right? So in my experience, manufacturers were moved to patch, and that's hard. And we know manufacturers that in hospitals that were taken down in the U.S. as well. So I mean, it did have an impact, and really there are probably compensating controls to get around it, but I'm not sure how comfortable I feel having an NSA level pathogen floating around in my system.
Yeah.
And to take this out a little bit further, I think Bill's also asking, like, I can have a central management system where I'm tracking assets, right, and versions of assets, which is great first step, in order to to put your strategy to practice, right? Kind of what you're talking about, Mike, and when you come to conclusion, how do you know that that system is patched or up to date? And this goes to sort of like getting to real-time tracking in the field, like how, and you can see the echoes of that in the guidance document. Like how are we, I guess roughly speaking, behavior monitoring, but like how do we know we have unique hardware instances out in the field? How are we keeping track of those, even though they're owned and operated by somebody else, right? Like you're still on the hook as a manufacturer from a regulatory standpoint for its security, safety, efficacy, and security. Like, yeah, getting some dip into that behavior monitoring and sort of on hardware, reporting, real-time reporting back is going to be like the critical next step.
Cool. So trying not to make this a shameless plug for what we do at MedCrypt, but it seems like our team at MedCrypt has done some tabletop exercises with our customers to go through their existing quality system and incident response scenarios and say, hey, hypothetically, what if X happened? What does your process dictate? So that's something that if you're able to do that internally at a device manufacturer, you need some help. I think is a pretty valuable exercise. Got a good question here from an anonymous attendee. We speak about patches of devices, but if devices are not connected to the internet, but are cyber devices, what type of approach could be accepted by FDA? And I think that gets to some confusion about what a patch means. I think a lot of times people think about a Tesla that receives over-the-air updates and we can patch this thing tomorrow morning if we need to. Very few, if any, medical devices have that level of over-the-air software update capability. So I think maybe two representative use cases for us to think about this question in the context of would be, number one, something like a drug infusion pump that runs an operating system like Linux. It sits inside a hospital. It has an Ethernet port, but it doesn't phone home. It doesn't talk to the internet. What does patching look like for a device like that versus maybe a consumable medical device? Like there are companies that make insulin delivery systems in very high volumes that are manufactured. Their firmware is burned into some tiny microcontroller and it sits on a shelf for a year or two before it's delivered. Naomi, what does patching look like for those two different classes of devices?
Sure. So the devices that sit in the hospital, there is typically a notification sent out by the manufacturer that says, we need to issue software updates to all of the pumps that you have in your inventory. We currently believe that we have sold you 550. The hospital goes in and looks and they're like, we seem to have 612, or maybe they have 480. There's almost always a mismatch there. The technician shows up with the right kinds of cables and connectors and whatever, chain of custody protected device they're going to use to perform the update. Maybe it's a tablet, maybe it's a thumb drive. I hate thumb drives. We shouldn't be doing things with thumb drives, but that's a supply chain issue. They show up and they start to go device to device, logging which serial number they're updating when, and applying a firmware update. Hopefully that thing is signed. Hopefully the whole process is done as securely as possible. Hopefully there's verification of the identity of the person who shows up and says they're doing it. But there's a lot to unwrap there. It ends up being a human in the loop sneaker net kind of scenario. And yeah, Bill said it's not so reliable. It's not. Humans aren't reliable. It's a reality. But the alternative is forcing connectivity on a device that maybe isn't designed for it, that probably doesn't have a super secure method for that connectivity, and introducing a new attack surface by connecting it. The benefits of having it connected, despite all of that, once you deal with it in your threat model and put in your appropriate controls, are that you can query it and say, hey, what version are you? You're tracking 12 different versions of your SBOM because you've delivered devices over 5 years and you've had all of these different software versions go out there. Once you know what version it is, you can say, you know what, you're like 3 versions out of date and there's some critical vulnerabilities that have been resolved. We really need you to patch. Please accept it. Or your contractual obligations are that you have to allow it and that we just push it. And we have a mechanism in place that says we can't roll it back once it's been pushed. So if there is a vulnerable version, it can't be knocked back onto your system by somebody else. So you've got this whole cascading possibilities of how do I patch it? What could go wrong? How do I make sure it doesn't go wrong? But, FDA will ask you today, why are you not doing it over the air? There are certainly circumstances under which you can't and you shouldn't. And those may or may not overlap. But for the most part, if there's a valid way to do it over the air, why wouldn't you? You don't have to worry about, do I have enough people? You don't have to worry about, wow, what if COVID 2.0 comes out and suddenly we can't travel? We can't show up at the hospital to deal with it. What if we're dealing with a situation where fabricators are shut down again and, we're not getting new chips and we need to get out there and adjust? You need to have some flexibility. And if you have an ability to connect to a system and change its behavior over the air, modify some software functions, put in some compensating controls rapidly, there's a benefit to it. But there may be devices that's not a good model for. And so you need to understand what the risks are and describe them to FDA and walk through a justification. Like if you have a device that truly cannot be updated, that's okay. You need to walk through what's the scenario then. If I have to recall every single insulin pen I have because I cannot update it, that's my answer. It's not a pretty story. And especially the pre-filled ones, now you've got a drug shortage issue. So you really have to weigh all of these different considerations when you think about it. But there's always a way to explain it where everybody can agree to the methodology.
Yeah, I would say anecdotally, there are maybe 10 or 20% of the device manufacturers that we talk to will say, we don't patch software. It's not really a thing, right? Because we build the device, we put software in it, we ship it, and then the customer uses it, and eventually they stop using it, and that's it. And there are cases, to Naomi, to your point, where that's the best that can be done. But I don't think it's 20% of the time. I think it's like 2 to 5% of medical devices fall into a category where the way this thing is manufactured, sold, delivered, firmware updates just aren't tenable. And therefore, we as the device manufacturer accept the business risk that comes along with potentially having to recall every one of these things. So if you are a device manufacturer and your organization's stance on software updates is we don't do those because X, I would think pretty critically about that. We've got 10 minutes or so left in the webinar. I'd love to make sure that we get to anybody else's questions that come up here. So let's see. One, how extensive would you say that the cybersecurity work should be related to a device that contains embedded software, mostly in-house developed? Lost it. But has no exposed ports, programming communication port hidden mechanically, and has no wireless communication. So I mean, I think it gets back to assuming no exposed ports, that's no USB ports, no Ethernet cables, and if there is an Ethernet port, it's hidden mechanically, so there's a latch over it, has no wireless communication. Seth, I don't know, what do you think? I don't know if I go scale 1 to 10 percentage man hours. I don't know, what's the right way to qualify that?
I mean, these are great questions, right? And ones that need to be answered. And I always come back to 2 pillars. And I just responded back to the answer on like patching devices, right? Like if we're not connected or truly not connected, it always comes back to your assessment, right? Threat model drives the cybersecurity risk assessment. These are the 2 critical documents where you can answer your own question, right? So when you talk about, hey, what about this situation? Okay, great. What did you determine, right? And then how are you packaging that determination for FDA's consumption? Do you believe it? Would an independent arbiter believe it? Both sort of clinical arbiter like the FDA or a security arbiter, whether that's independent testers or independent validate, whoever, would they believe what you say, right? And that's what it comes down to, right? So it's not that there's no possible combination of or lack of combination of ports and what I'm trying to think of, interfaces that is acceptable to do less. It's the fact that you're going through the process of determining that, right? Not that you're just like, oh, we don't have anything, so therefore we don't have to do any of these processes. No, you put the SPDF in place or follow an SPDF or some semblance of a secure lifecycle processes in order to make that determination. You see the difference? It's very critical.
So the answer is it's more than NA on the eStar submission, and perhaps the end engineering work is less than if you had a surgical robot that was being controlled by somebody around the planet.
I'm glad you mentioned that, yes, Mike, because in the document now they said it scales, and this was what sort of and just inside baseball, talking with Bill Mizell in the early stages of this document, and he's looking at me saying, well, and this is sort of where the tiers were trying to go. It's like, if I have lower risk, I should have to do less, right? And the answer is kind of, right? If I have lower risk, the amount of work that I have to do to secure it should be lower. Our document evidentiary basis for proving that should be smaller, right? So securing and this is the example that came up all the time, a CVS, a thermometer that you go buy, a handheld thermometer you buy off CVS, I almost said CVSS. That's how you know you're in vulnerability management. CVS, to check the temperature of your forehead. Yes, please develop that under a secure product development framework. However, the outputs are probably minimal, right? If you have a temperature control mechanism inside, I'm sure they have them inside, radiation oncology, devices. Temperature is probably important. I don't know, Mike, you could probably tell me. That is probably a bit more critical to get right. And then therefore the security analysis around that is probably more robust, more lengthy, more substantial. So the idea of put these processes in place, they will naturally scale with the amount of risk is something that really needs to be emphasized here.
Yeah. Cool. We'll go through a couple more here in semi-rapid fire fashion. what kind of feedback have MedCrypt's customers received from the FDA relating to SBOMs that have been submitted? So a couple of things that I've seen people submit an Excel spreadsheet with 10 software libraries, and the FDA come back and say, "Really? You sure about that? Like, you're not missing anything? Is you're running Windows because you got a box there?" And then I've also seen device manufacturers submit a list of vulnerabilities relating to their SBOM, which is 6 vulnerabilities and a rationale for why all 6 of them do not need to be patched. Any other trends that you've seen, Naomi?
Sure. We saw somebody submit a not very satisfying software bill of materials recently and receive a Section 524B citation in their deficiency that stated you provided a software bill of materials in your submission. However, it does not appear to include, and I'm quoting, all baseline attributes. The target is moving. What does that mean? I think there needs to be some clarity from FDA about what they mean by all baseline attributes. Because if you compare what they were asking for to the NTIA minimum elements in an NTIA document, it is different than the material they cite in their deficiency, which is the NTIA multi-stakeholder process on software component transparency document from 2021 in October. Which is framing software component transparency, establishing a common software bill of materials. There's a bunch of different targets out there, and it is not clear which one FDA is expecting people to aim at. But I will also note that the 2024 A list of guidance documents that FDA is targeting for includes a draft pre-market cybersecurity guidance, which means FDA is expecting to iterate one more time rapidly, and hopefully will clarify exactly these types of questions, which I'm sure we're all going to be having some heartburn about.
Yeah. So they're asking for more detail than I would have guessed.
They are, and I was surprised by it. Yeah.
Jacob Johnson, can you speak to what sort of expectations there will be for personnel responsible in the cybersecurity management plan? How many people? What sort of roles do they have, Seth?
Let's all look under our chairs and pull out our copies of 21 CFR 820 and turn to, I don't know what page it's on. I wish I really did, because that would be really funny. 820.25, which is basically, hey, you have to have trained folks that are qualified for the job that they're doing. So got to have people that are responsible for doing the job and sort of on the QoS documents have to be trained. And I did hear anecdotally at least one instance of, hey, these people are pulling down and modifying crypto functions out of your repository. Are these people qualified to do that? That was an inspection, and I was absolutely shocked to that level of detail. But I wouldn't say that that's across the board, but that seems plausible given where the industry's going.
Cool. Last 2 questions I'm going to combine into one. You got a hospital ventilator, somebody plugs their phone into it. Is this a vulnerability? And then I think in a related way, I've got an app that is on a consumer's standalone mobile computing device. Would you say that my app has a wireless technology? How are these 2 things related? What sorts of questions should a device manufacturer be asking themselves during the design process, Naomi, to get answers to those questions?
Oh boy, misuse of a device in a hospital. When has that ever happened? You should be accounting for the possibility that somebody is going to misuse your device. And boy, you had better have a good plan to prevent that. So if somebody plugged their phone into a ventilator and the ventilator understood how to talk to that phone and could reach back out or be reached out to, over that mechanism, you're in trouble because it should not be able to do that. There are situations in which FDA is expecting to see you indicate in your requirements that this cannot happen. This is a situation you identify as being risky and it should not occur. And Seth has cited the words reasonably foreseeable misuse. That is absolutely spot on. You do not want to have a situation like that happen. If you have that kind of possibility with your device, you are a connected device because you're connectable. Going back to a previous question, how far do I have to go? Well, I'll be honest with you. If you have a motivated engineer, I happen to be a motivated engineer who walks around with a heavy duty toolkit, and if all it takes is for me to use a Dremel tool to pop your thing open and I can plug into it and do something, you haven't done enough. If I can get into a JTAG port, you should have disabled it. So in reality, you have to really look at, how hard is it for somebody to do that? My kids could do that, yeah, they're kind of nerdy like mom, but the reality is they have access to all of my tools in the basement. And if they decided that they wanted to go down there and grab my multimeter and start tinkering around, yeah, I have to explain to them not to stick those into power outlets and things, but that they can and they will, and they watch mom do it. So
you're telling me a Dremel needs to be part of my threat model. That is not very.
It should be. It should be.
Right.
The reality is that you have to consider the possibility that people are going to walk around and push the red button that says, "Don't push me." Actually, that's really tempting. Really don't write that on your buttons.
Yeah, whatever you do, don't open this box. Great. So one final question for each of you, maybe 20 or 30-second answer. You are a product security leader at a medical device manufacturer, and your boss's boss says to you, "Hey, I heard there's this new FDA cybersecurity thing. How big of a deal is this, and what should we do?" Seth, what's your answer?
If we do not address this, we're going to have a bad time.
Love it. So you're going to answer them with the South Park meme.
Yeah, I know. That's all I could come up with, Mike. Thank you.
Naomi, what do you got?
I'm kind of with Seth. Somebody Ken said need to ban JTAG books from the schools. Just because you ban the books doesn't mean somebody doesn't figure it out and share it on Telegram. You cannot prevent information from getting out there. And the reality is that if your threat model does not account for the dark web, you're in trouble, because there are lots of people using the dark web to do all the things, or just GitHub. Forget the dark web. Kids are learning these days from the strangest sources, and not just kids, grown-ups too. We're going out there and poking around and figuring out, oh wow, I can do that. Why not? Let's try it. If there's a way to break it, we're going to find it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody hanging on here and all the great questions. There have been a couple of questions about if we will share the slides. We're happy to share the slides. They're not in a particular order. It was just sort of some resources we could draw from in the conversation, but we're happy to send those out to attendees. And then just as a final plug here, MedCrypt, we're a medical device cybersecurity company. We started in 2016. Our goal is to provide not only services to help with what you are facing getting through FDA regulations, but also security tools that go into the devices to help make them secure by design. And then we can have some engineering services to help tie all of that together. So if you want more information, please reach out, info@medcrypt.com. We would love to talk. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Thanks for attending. We're looking forward to talking in the future.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.